can make mistakes in their initial setup phase, which then has a big impact on the business later on, which can be avoided if you understand.
Sorry, you have to.
Right, this isn't working.
Not working. Okay. So you don't need. You can take that out of my back pocket. Yeah. Okay.
Is this working now? Can you hear me? Great. I wondered why you were all looking blankly at me. I couldn't quite understand. Okay, I'll start again. My name's Jon Hare. I've been making games for the last 30 years, designing and selling them and licensing them out. And I want to talk to you guys about the business of making games. Now, in my lifetime, I've been very lucky to be successful for some period of time. My old company was called Sensible Software, which is an old company in the 80s and 90s. So we made things like Sensible Soccer, Cannon Fodder, and before that, Megalomania, and Whizball, Parallax, Shoot 'em Up Construction Kit, many titles, basically creating many IPs that people still talk about today. And I'm here to talk to you about the business of making games. So on the one hand, as game makers, as runners of independent studios, we have a great time being creative. And right now the buzzword is about indie studios. Indie meaning independent. My problem at the moment with the current setup of a lot of small companies when they initially set up, get initial money coming in, the way they do the contractual affairs, the way they handle their IP, creates a situation where they're not truly independent, even if they use this indie buzzword. So what I want to do is explore the business models that have happened over the different phases of games development as a business for small development companies, so we can trace through history where certain business models worked and didn't work, and then finally end up talking about what is a good idea for models now by learning from the past, okay? So, I have divided our history up into 3 eras. You can see this here. These are my own stupid eras, okay? I've got to ask your forgiveness. This is the first time I've done this talk. I'm very excited to do it because I think it's very important. But a lot of the figures are maybe not 100% accurate. They're a bit blurry. I want you to get the feeling from what I'm saying here and not talk about that should have been 80% and not 90%. That's not really the point here, okay? So, here are game development eras. The Dark Ages. Now, I started in 1985, okay, in the middle of the Dark Ages. A lot of you guys, the reason I call them the Dark Ages, most people setting up companies now weren't around at this time. They don't really know what happened then. So you might know some of our old games like Sensible Soccer or Cannon Fodder, or games like Populous or Elite, these things. They were all made in the Dark Ages, right? But you probably don't know the business models we worked under to achieve those things. And there's a lot of business models we worked in those times which are quite applicable for small studios now, you know? When we set Sensible Software up, me and my friend were both 19 and working from his bedroom. Now this is as indie as you want. And this is how a lot of teams started then. Even at the height of when we had our great games, we were only a 6-man team. This is very equivalent to what you guys are doing now. The difference was the business setup and framework and the way people founded development companies was different at that time, okay? So from the Dark Ages, we then go to the Middle Ages. Now the Middle Ages, basically 1995 to 2004, is the time, it's the console years, basically, okay? So this time things changed. In these times, it was very hard to sell original games, to make your own IP and make it stick. The big console companies wanted big games and they wanted sequels to those big games. It's very hard for us, even for someone like me with a good reputation as a designer, to get people to buy into my designs. No one wanted them at this time. Almost impossible, pretty much around the world. Then we have the dawn of the mobile era here in the new age. And in this age, it started off really terrible. We got the same deals from the console guys, from the mobile guys, but they paid you even less money. And it was still impossible to do original stuff. These are the old Nokia mobiles I'm talking about, the old times. And then we moved to iPhone, Android, and all these other systems. And suddenly the ability to be original again emerged, like a phoenix from the ashes of 15 years of no expression, okay? So, here's the EU's experience of development, and it's slightly different to the States. We'll go through this. 1985 to 1994, we didn't really have much development in Europe from 1975 to 1982, 83, very little. Some people doing some early stuff, but not so much. In the home computer things, and we're talking about things like the Spectrum, the Commodore 64, the Amiga, the ST. This is the home computer era, which flourished in Europe, especially in the UK and in France, particularly, is where development was strong at this time. And in this time, we learned how to make new games, how to do deals, how to sign contracts, made plenty of mistakes, how to earn from royalties, all these things. Then we have this 1995 to 2004 rise of the consoles. This is important to understand what happened. When the consoles started to come, we couldn't sell original games anymore. Any studio that set up from 1995 onwards to 2004, there's guys here I know who've been working in the games industry for 10 years, never had a single original IP come out, had lots of games canned. It was a very terrible time for people. And a lot of you, when you speak to people about the games industry as it was before, people are going to talk to you about this time, like that is what used to happen. And a lot of people have forgotten about this time, which is what I'm talking to you about. Because now we're in this mobile and digital revolution, we need to skip back from that time to here to learn the lessons of how to construct our businesses. Because a lot of the models we spent years getting right in this time are now applicable to here. But it's got to be done at the stage when you're setting up your company, setting up contracts and getting money in, that you don't make mistakes. So, here is the way the businesses worked in this time in the EU. Nearly all of these companies were small privately owned companies, okay? You think about us with Sensible Software, you had the Bitmap Brothers, you had Graph Gold, you had Bullfrog, you had the guys at Delphine, you had David Braben, Jeff Minter, etc. All these guys, all these old games. All small privately owned companies, and by privately owned, I mean normally 100% privately owned. No talk about selling shares. Just set up a company, make some games, sell them and get royalties. And if you're lucky, control the IP, which we all learnt to do, okay? Now, in this time, we worked almost as a pack with each other. So we'd be working, getting deals with publishers and saying, okay, so what royalties are you getting now? What kind of royalties are you getting? What kind of advances are you getting? And by learning from each other, we managed as developers to get a lot of power by collectively going in and saying, okay, now we won't accept 15% anymore, we want 25%, we want 30%, we want 40%, even to 50%, okay? By working together, we learned how to do this, by nudging the advances up from starting with 5,000 when I started in 1985. By 1995, we were getting £1 million advances. Imagine this. Huge progress in business for us by working together and by remaining independent, and normally by still owning 100% of our shares by the end of this. This is exactly the point of this talk. How you can make sure that you're in that position during your company to retain creative and financial control. Okay? That's exactly what this talk's about. In the console era, most things were controlled by corporations. Unfortunately, all of us pretty much cashed in between about 1993 and 1998. I'm talking about all the developers and the publishers. So in this phase, when we've been working hard to build our businesses, all of us effectively sold to bigger companies. Nearly all. All the publishing power in the UK, for example, really died off in this time. And of course, we had here the rise of the corporations such as Bertelsmann, Warner, Sony, big media companies and hardware companies moving into the game space. You know, there was a time when Sony wasn't making games. You know, they weren't focused on that. They started to move in now, and they started with, especially with companies like Warner and Bertelsmann and big media companies from the film and music industry, to impose their models of business on our games industry. And in this time when we were thought to be not professional and just bedroom coders, we made a lot more money than this time because we were controlling things more, okay? Or a lot of us did. A few people made a really good transition here, depending on the platform they worked on. So all of us home computer guys, the home computers died in about 1994 and 1995, and with it died a lot of our businesses. If you had been on Nintendo, or started to work on PlayStation early, or were working on PC, then you could, and some people like Bullfrog is a good example, successfully transitioned between these two phases, you know? We made a good transition between Commodore 64, the 8-bit and the 16-bit era. Some companies made good transitions here. And then here, you've got the mobile era, again, another transition. Can you transition from console to mobile? What everyone's struggling with right now, okay? Some people making incredibly late moves into the mobile world. I had a meeting with Ubisoft, I think, as recently as 2 years ago, about a game, and they said, we haven't got our mobile strategy sorted out yet. Can you believe it, okay? So, because when you're dominant in a field like Ubisoft have been in consoles for a long time, you don't want to change. I know this from my experience of being on the top of the Amiga world in the mid-90s. We didn't want to change to consoles, so we blew it. We did 3D late, and we transitioned late, okay? Anyway, the point of this is this mobile era has got a different financial model. Now the financial model tends to be, we've got a little startup company, loads more people making games. How do we get going? And what we're doing is we're looking at VC funding, okay? Now the point of this talk is that VC funding is not an appropriate model for most small companies. And yet somehow we're buying into this. Now I'm going to flip now to the US experience, and then we'll talk about this a little bit more at the end of that. Here's the US experience of history. It's different. 1975 to 1994. In the early part of this, we did nothing in Europe. In the States, there was stuff going on the VCS. Atari VCS. It's basically America stroke Japan. You can read Japan into this as well. The main games selling in the States in these years are VCS, NES, Nintendo, and some DOS games on the PC. And here's the difference. It's different kind of companies making these. This is mainly coming from Atari and Nintendo. This is almost a closed shop, okay? So there's not so many independent developers. If we look at the guys who are big on the DOS and the old PC stuff, you're looking at people like LucasArts, founded by George Lucas, not exactly a startup. You know, he had a bit of money already. EA, who did start off, I guess, quite small at one stage, and probably from this era going through, the most successful at transitioning through the eras one after the other, okay? And people like Origin, who set up quite small and got big quite quickly. They're an example of a successful small studio growing quickly, run by two brothers. Richard Garriott, you probably know, is Lord British, but his brother called Robert, who's done all the business forever, is behind him and has always been behind him, you know? And often, as game makers, as game players, we're blind to the business behind the making of the games. But generally, there were far fewer independent studios in the States than in Europe in this time. Then we have the rise of the consoles happening in the States at the same time. Then we have mobile and digital revolution. But here's the difference. This, in America, was called the indie revolution. Why indie? Because they never had the indie here that we had. We already had our indie time. We had our indie time back in the home computer era in Europe. The Americans never had it. So we've borrowed the expression from them. So here we go. The prehistoric console era, I'm calling this, because this was what the Americans experienced. Hardware companies or private companies running the businesses. Not the small private companies we do with 2 or 3 guys or friends or students or whatever getting together and making something happen, but a little bit more business-minded companies with a desire to grow. This was again controlled by corporation, the console time, and this is VC funded, and this is my point. This VC funding is basically and largely an American model based around companies in the Bay Area of San Francisco where all the money is and most of the investment is. I'm sure well over 50% of what's been invested in tech and games things has been in this small area. And what's happened is when a startup talks about now how they're going to set their company up, they automatically think about this VC funding model, like that's what you do. Like we're going to set this little company and then we're going to be Facebook or Zynga or something else in 3 years' time. This is a fantasy. And it's not necessary, and it's very damaging to set up assuming that's where you're going to end up, in this massive corporation swelling from 3 guys to a couple of thousand people and then doing this massive sellout 5 years down the line. This doesn't happen to most people. It's not a prudent way to set up a development company. We set up Sensible Software, as I said, with 2 guys, grew to 6, then we went to 20, that was too many. We had lots of hits over 13 years, and then we sold our company. We never even had this aspiration to be big and corporate, and we didn't need it because we made a lot of money from royalties, okay? So, My point is now, how can we take these old models where we make IP, control it, license it out, and earn from royalties? How can we apply that to now? The answer is when you're setting your company up to anticipate what you're going to do, to plan for success, to not plan with fear, to not go, oh, someone's giving me 30,000 euros, that's amazing, have 50% of my company. You know, these are disastrous moves. This is setting yourself up to fail. And I'm hearing so many stories about this, and this is coming from this. Because we are, in Europe, tend to copy an American model which works quite well for a number of US studios, but also fails a lot. And here it fails more. And also for the VCs, this is bad model. So this talk is also for VCs. Why are VCs investing in startup companies of 3 guys who've just left university, who've never even run a business before? It's crazy, right? Would you put your money there? Why would you do that? The old model we had back in the old days, people invested in our games, not our companies. This is the point. Modern indie gaming is a VC-backed, US-led directive, based on the fact they never had the independent era when we had it in the first place, okay? Also, and the innuendo here is, although it's called indie, often it's not independent because they're not controlling their shares. Therefore, they are not independent. They're answerable to shareholders. They don't always have creative control. This isn't what being independent's about. Independent's about doing what the hell you want with your money and your creative power, okay? That is what independent means. Why has this changed now? Because digital distribution has broken the consoles. We can see this now. The old ways consoles isn't working. A new model needs to be found. How do we keep going? How do we keep making money? We've got more channels needing more content. Why do Apple always talk about the number of games they've got on their system and not the quality of the games? Why do they not tell us that 40% of games never sell even one copy or get downloaded once, you know? Because the channel holders at the moment want volume because they're getting money from marketing and from other ways of making money than just selling games. For us as game makers and people who control IP, we don't get a part of this cut. We don't get a part of the channel sending stuff backwards and forwards. The marketing stuff, we get a very small amount of money coming out of that. This isn't our core business. Anyone in the games industry who's made good money can tell you it's about making good IP and then selling it and licensing it properly, and more importantly, controlling it, okay? VCs need new corporations. The VCs work on the basis that companies start small and grows very quickly. They need new people to emerge. At the moment, they've got this very strange 1 in 10 model. Like, we'll see 10 companies with not much money, knowing that 9 are going to die and that 1 might succeed, or maybe 1 in 100. And I've heard terrible models that have emerged that have alerted me and made me want to do this talk. I've spoken to people that have had, recently this is, £150,000 investment in their company for 50% of their shares. So, why are they doing that? That means that already they've lost control. Every single dollar they make for the rest of their time in business, they're only getting half of it because they're giving half to the shareholders. They're losing creative control and financial control from day one. Disastrous, unless you're planning to fail and then do it again. And what's the point of that, okay? That's not what we aspire to do. I've heard other stories. I heard stories about companies in Scandinavia where you typically get an investment of about 50,000 euros. The 2 or 3 guys, generally students, or sometimes people breakaways from big companies that have been in the business but never run a business before. They've set their own business up and making mistakes. People would get £50,000 for 6 months, 50,000 euros for 6 months. Typically, 9 out of 10 of these fail. They get nowhere. After 3 or 4 months, they know they're going to fail. They see the time out, they take the money, and they fold. The ones that succeed get to the end of the 6 months. The investors go, that looks good. And they go, you know what, but we need a bit more money. Now, these investors have already taken 30% of the company for that 50,000 euros. So the company's got to go back and ask for more money, and then they take more shares. And they nudge that up towards the 50 mark again. So they've now got their money to finish their product after about a year and a half, but they're still now controlling half their company. They've not even had a game out yet. Even if their IP's a hit, they've lost control. There's some good examples in Scandinavia of very successful teams stuck in this trap, okay? This is again a bad investment model. If you look at the extreme of this, I spoke to one guy in the UK, a very experienced guy in production. running his own company, and we sat down and talked about his business. And I found out that he only owned 7% of the shares in his company. 7, okay? This is because of a deal with another company where he had shares somewhere else. And we were talking about how to make his business better. And I said, why do you even want to make money when you're only making 7% of it? There's just no point. You know, try and control 100% if you can. Or if you need to, just maybe, you know, at least keep 80. Keep control. It's financial and creative control. You don't get pushed around. Otherwise, not independent, and 3 years in, you're going to hate the experience and want to get out, okay? So, again, same thing. Europe already had creatively and financially independent game development before indies. When? In this small privately owned home computer era. This is the era that we did. Now, what I'm going to do now is explore differences and the way that you can learn from these old business models to hopefully help your companies if you're setting up. Why are most indie developers unaware of the early European independent development scene? This is the reason. Most internet content initially, in the initial setup, came from the US during or after this period. In other words, the history of computer games, if you read it on the internet, is largely from the American perspective. Largely, you're going to read about PC games, old Nintendo games. Just look at the list of best games, best game developers. It's all very US and Japanese slanted when you get to the old stuff. This is because they never experienced our home computer part. So you're not going to learn about this stuff in general from the internet. You've got to hunt for it, okay? It won't be the normal thing you're going to find, but it existed. Why do a lot of us older developers sound bitter? We do. You've probably spoken to lots of us. Why don't they give indies a bit more respect? This is the reason. This is the perspective of me as an older guy who's made a lot of money making my own games. Older devs blame small indies for devaluing the market. Free to play, free games, selling your game for nothing, right? Insanity. Try buying a free beer or a free sandwich or a free car, okay? This has happened because there have been VC-funded companies with what we see, this is our perspective, no business sense, the guys running the companies. They've got no business sense because they're just starting up. They've just left university. They've just split away from a company that's been controlled by someone else. They've never done business before. But in these early decisions, when there's so many VC sharks out there, or content hunting sharks out there, looking for people with no business experience to take advantage of your naivety, that is what's been happening. Will you make the game for nothing? Of course, I love making games. Immediately, you're trapped. And all of us are undercut. So when we went from 5,000 up to 1 million advances in 10 years, you guys coming along saying we'll do it for nothing has totally destroyed that business model for selling IP. We spent ages building a really good model for developers. The console years took away the ability to sell independent games at all. In that time, everyone lost what we learnt in the old days, okay? So now when you're setting up now, you don't know how we worked. You won't get any advice from VCs because they know nothing about the business. You won't get any advice in general from American companies because they never had the experience. But us old European guys remember the experience. And what I would like to do is talk to the smaller companies now about how to set up and avoid this trap of having no value in your company and learning from our old business models. And it's all to do with how you set up structurally, financially, and contractually within your company at the start. This is the key, okay? So, what is the difference between an early dev from the home computer era and those from the console era? There is a massive difference. Maybe it's hard for people to perceive, because most people you're going to know are from the console era. The guys who couldn't sell an independent game for 10 years. The guys who had loads of stuff canned all the time. The guys who've forever done work for hire and feel trapped and creatively castrated by this process, okay? Home computer devs, us old guys, created and licensed our own original IP. This is what you guys have the power to do now and you are doing now, okay? But if you can learn some of those business lessons we learned, you can do this much more efficiently now. Most console devs never got the chance. They never got the chance to do their own IPs because they couldn't sell them. None of us could sell games in this period between 1995 and 2005, original games. So they lost the skills about how to manage and license IP. These are lost skills we've got to re-find again now. What can my indie company learn from the early devs? Here are the two important lessons. ownership equals control. Okay, control is the number one thing. If financial and creative control, protect your shares and IP. So the lesson we learned in the early days when we were doing deals in the home computer era, we sold our IP. We were like you guys. We're setting up. Here's a deal. The first deal we did, I think we got £5,000 for 15% royalty. We gave away the IP. We took £1,000 check home. We were so happy. We didn't realise it was a terrible, terrible deal. This was on Parallax with Ocean. We never got paid a penalty in royalties because they were not exactly great in that way. We didn't control our IP, but we learnt. And within 4 or 5 years, we learnt to keep our IP, to not give it away. We didn't need to give our IP away. We could actually control our IP. The reason we changed was because if you gave a company like Ocean your IP and you gave them a Commodore 64 game, they might convert it to an Amiga. But what about the other platforms they didn't convert to? Actually, some of them, they were good. They would go Amiga, PC. What about ST? What about the market in China? What about other places? So the old trap was we'd give people worldwide rights and they simply wouldn't use them. They'd sit on them. So we learned to sign different kind of deals. So you'd go to a publisher and say, you want our game? Great. You want the worldwide rights for all formats? Great. Have it. With one caveat. A, we own the IP, not you. It's a license. Secondly, if you don't exploit, we've got the right to say to you, we want to see a version on, now it would be, we want a version on Sony Vita. We want a version on PSN. We want a version on Xbox One, say. And give that publishing company 6 months, a year to make that happen. If they don't, the rights revert back to you. These kind of deals are smart and fair. In other words, if they're backing you with money, let them back you with money, give them the chance to exploit the IP, give them options on sequels and versions, but make sure you retain the rights, that they revert if they don't exploit them. Then you don't get trapped. Then if you want a version out in Russia or a version out in China, you can achieve that by taking the rights back because they're not exploiting it, okay? So these are the things which took us 10 years to learn how to do this properly. This was a learning process between a collective of about 15 companies over a 10-year period. You guys can learn all this stuff now, sit down and do deals in a smarter way and understand how to... as long as you're starting up and you're still making a game and you control the IP, you can do whatever deals you want. The power is with you. The moment you let that go because you let too many shares in your company go, or you sign over too many rights on your IP, you've lost that control. So understand what you're standing to lose from the start, okay? So, here's a focus for independent indies. This word, privately owned. Try, if at all possible, to own your company 100% ideally, certainly at least 80%. Don't be answerable to other people about how you spend your money, where you're spending your money, or what you're doing. Make your own decisions, okay? So now I've done a whole bunch of key factors, which I'll whiz through and then get to the end. Okay, so platform key factors. The home computer era is all open platforms. Amiga, ST, Commodore 64, we could do what we want. The platform holders didn't put any gates on what we put out. We just, as developers, signed deals with publishers for advances against royalties. That was it. This was a great time. Basically, we could do what the hell we wanted. Then the console era came in, and they were very controlled. So if you're working with Sony, or you're working with Nintendo, or even with Sega, but more so especially Nintendo, everything is going through loads and loads of little rules that you've got to conform to get your game published. Not just in content, but in lots of display and other areas, which we found quite restrictive. But in a way, it retained a quality threshold for example, Nintendo's the best example. There's not many bad games on Nintendo platforms because they did gatekeeping, okay? But this was a very hard point. This was a time when we couldn't get many original IPs there because the gatekeeping was so strong. Then we've got the mobile era. Now these are what I call open censored platforms. In other words, there is some censorship going through people like Apple. If you've got something which they deem offensive, they won't let it be published. So whereas in these times, no one would look to see if we had stuff which would offend people because it's got Christian motifs in it. No one cared, okay? But apart from that kind of stuff, it's quite open now. You do have to conform to Apple's protocols of delivery, but in general, you can see by the amount of stuff in the App Store, they're not really vetting it that closely, right? I think we all know that. So there's lots of parallels between now and then. It's almost the same situation. So this is the thing to exploit. All these platforms, you can make your games happen on, But now you need to control your IP and license it out platform by platform by platform. And I would advise also, get partners on each of these platforms. Someone who can help you with distribution and marketing on Android, on iOS, on Steam, wherever you want to take the game. Don't try and do everything yourself. It's very tempting to think you can. Actually, it's quite detrimental. If your key skills are a developer, don't play at being a publisher. Work with people who are good at those things, cut them in, give them a percentage of what you're getting. This is the old model. The old model, when we were working, let's go through the next slides, we might find this. Oh, this is gameplay dev time, okay. The old model was that we would take, when we got it together in the early 90s, we would make an IP and we would sign these deals for an Amiga version, an ST version, a PC version, that's fine. And then we'd take the other platforms, if the publishers didn't exploit them, and sign a deal over here, a deal over here. Someone to do it in a different territory for a period of time on a platform. By carving it up, you're multiplying your sources of income. You're not so beholden to one company that if they go under, you collapse, because you might have several streams coming from one IP. Okay, so these are all ways of constructing businesses to mitigate risk. Now, this is a slight side, this slide actually. This is about, on the formats, the amount of time in the development process which you focused on gameplay as opposed to technical stuff. So, on the old models like Amiga with fairly set ways of delivering software, 75% of our time in the studio making games was spent talking about what we could do with the game. Tuning gameplay, playing with stuff, okay? When we flipped to the console era, and especially the dawn of 3D graphics and complex animation systems and all these kind of weird things, wonderful things we had to do with animation and stuff, it flipped around. By the time you actually got the graphics running properly, animating properly, displaying on the screen, clip properly, everything else, memory management and stuff, the actual tweaking of gameplay generally came down to about 25% of the time you spent on the game, and 75% of the time you spent just technically getting it working and running properly, okay? This is why during this time we saw a lot of games just being the same as each other. People were spending more time, they had to spend more time because of the amount of manpower and the power of the machines just getting the things to work. So the ability to tune and refine and play around with game types diminished during this period. Then we got the mobile era. So the mobile era is interesting because the ability to make games and do stuff creatively, especially in 2D and now in 3D and with great stuff we've got like Unity and other engines now, we don't need to do a lot of that hard work everyone was doing personally here in this era, which was taking all their time up. We've got that time back. However, now we have to think about other stuff. How do we interface with Game Center? How do we interface with Flurry? How do we interface with different monetization systems, marketing systems, which is taking some of that creative time away in a different way? So on the engine side, we've gained time, but in the other hookup side, we lost time. So these are just really my rough random figures. I'm saying it's about 50-50 right now. Now we can spend 50% of our time working on great new games, which is double what we had in the console era. But still not as much as we used to have, okay? But it's good, it's moving in the right direction. This is an interesting slide which tells you everything you need to know about the problem with the game industry today. We released Sensible Soccer in 1992. That year, 1,000 games were released on the Amiga. We were lucky enough to be the Game of the Year that year, but it was 1 out of 1,000. I looked at the stats the other day for PlayStation games. In 2002, the same number, about 1,000 games on the PlayStation 2 in 2002. Last year, probably a conservative estimate, based on the statistics of how many apps were released and the probable percentage of them being games, about 100,000 games were released on the iPhone. Just statistically, you're 100 times less likely to be discovered now than you were here or here. This is our key problem now as developers. How do we get discovered, okay? Now we look at original IP titles. I'm just showing you all the different things, how things have changed. In the old days, 80% of what we made was our own IP. Sometimes we'd do Knight Rider or TV kind of like themes or film themes, but in general, 80% of output from games is probably original stuff. In the console era, when we couldn't sell original games, I reckon 10%, it could even be less, 10% was original stuff. And by the way, I'm not counting sequels as original here. A sequel is a sequel, which is great and makes money, and we all need to do that if we have a success, but it's not an original game. It's a copy or a sequel or a progression of an already established game. If you want to seed a new IP, remember your value of your company goes up by the value of your IP. To seed a new IP was very, very hard at this time. Now we've got the mobile era. I put 66%. I don't know, this could be a bit low. It could be a bit higher than this, but we do have quite a lot of games which are commercially tied into films, to TV, to stars, to sports, etc., etc. There are quite a lot of those in the charts, but also there's a very healthy amount of original content from developers. And indeed, I would say to any studio now, if you want to remain financially independent, you need to factor in probably working on a bit of licensed IP to get a bit of money in to support your original stuff. People don't like this, people have struggled with this for years, but it's still a prudent way to do it. If you can get a contract with a good commercial firm that takes up, say, up to 50% of your time, that is worth it, because that money can sustain your company whilst you're making original stuff without you having to sell your shares and lose your power. So the balance is, if you can find that kind of balance, it's very good. Zero return games. Okay, these are games which actually made no money. Now these numbers are probably a bit wrong, but in the home computer era, every single game we made at Sensible Software was published, apart from one actually. So we're talking about like 13 games out of 13 being published and earning royalties for us, via a publisher. Amazingly efficient, no waste of your time. If you make a game that's not published, you might as well not have started. All that time you spent is just waste, and the longer you spent, the more you wasted, the more money and time you wasted, okay? The console era, zero return games. And this is probably wrong, I've realised. I made this slideshow the other day, and this one's wrong. Because in this era, a lot of games, I know myself and I know Simon as well, we, for example, worked at Codemasters. Both of us had original games canned in this time. So in this era, the problem was about people canning games. They'd get so far, and then they go, no, we don't like that, we're going to can it. Again, a waste of time. But of the ones which actually came out, most of them made money. Okay? So from published games, most of these guys, 95% of his, 95% of these made some money. Maybe not enough to pay back the development costs, but some money. Look at now. 40% of apps on the App Store never get downloaded. Probably you could also say 55%, another 55% never make the money back that was invested in them. Probably even higher, okay? So the problem now is there's a massive inefficiency of development time turning back into income from game sales. Which is also something to do with that huge number here, yeah? So basically, there's always a finite amount of money in the public to buy games. So even though we've got 100,000 coming out here, maybe the ones that are monetizing is really only 1,000 anyway per year. Maybe the figures haven't changed that much. Let's look at unit sales prices. Let's look what's happened. When I started in 1985, games were selling for about $2 on little tape cassettes in shops that ran on things like Spectrums. By the end of this, we were selling games for $30 on consoles, sometimes higher. Then in the major console era, because obviously these eras all overlap each other, some games $75, maybe even higher in the console era on the bigger platforms, right? Now look at the mobile era. We start with zero. Most of the games are on zero now. This is a smaller number than that, right? This is the smallest number you can get. And this is a major problem for us, but it's where we are. Up to $10. You know, a $9.99 game would be a pretty good game on a digital or mobile platform. That's about as high as we can go before it becomes too high if it's paid. So we're also catching up with the fact that these numbers were getting higher and higher, just like our royalties were getting higher and higher, and now we've come down to this. So we need that volume. But the reality is, of those 100,000 games that come out, most of them either aren't being downloaded or aren't making their money back, okay? Now this is what I called, let me have a drink here, you can have a look at that. This is what I'm calling third-party, have I gone through that one? Okay, right. Third-party IP deals. In the home computer era, if you're doing a third party, like a film, TV, sports, whatever it might be, tie-in, star tie-in, you'd get probably anything at the start, $7,500, By the end, you could be commanding about $1.5 million on that. And your percentage you'd get would probably be, it could be nothing, but it could be 10 to 35%, okay? In the console era, the concept of work for hire came in. It wasn't really there before. So these zero royalty deals were really quite common. Some of the fees are very big, but your interest in the long term of the game would be not a lot, okay? And during this time, sometimes it would go up to 35%, but in general it would be nothing. Big developers could maybe command bigger money. You can see the money gets higher, but the royalties in general actually did get lower. So people learnt to work, to do a job for someone, to get paid to do the next job. This is the treading water when you get people making big games for other people, but never doing their own thing and being creatively frustrated during this time and never getting royalty income either. So people stopped believing in royalty contracts at all. You hear, in this period, people just stopped trying to do royalty contracts, stopped believing in it. But in that earlier era, that's how we made all our money. Now look at where we are now. And these third-party deals, you can probably get a lot of people offered this kind of like $30,000 mark for making a game right now on a platform, just enough to kind of make it worthwhile. A really, really good company can probably command $1.5 million on this, maybe much higher. But if you can get this now, you're doing extremely well. Okay, for us, this would be quite hard to achieve. Normally, the numbers are going to be somewhere around something like $500,000 is probably as much as you're going to get. I know some people that do that if they've done the second or third version of a game and they're trusted by somebody. Again, these figures I'm guessing, so you can disagree with me. It's not a problem, okay? Now let's look at own new IP deals. In the home computer era, as I say, we started off on a £5,000 deal, $7,500. By the end, we're selling games for £1 million, £1.5 million. And our percentage we were getting went from 15 to 50. When you can get a deal for 50% of the money the game's earning, with a $1.5 million advance to secure all your development, this is a dream deal. This is what we worked for 10 years to achieve as developers. This is where, in an ideal world, we'd all be back now on these platforms. The difference now is we don't have the publishing companies that used to fund us to give us these advances. This is the key difference. So we need to think about how we can create models which can emulate this and give us back developer power when we can command these kind of things. In the console era, own new IP deals, these were, you must understand, these were extremely hard to find. Most people couldn't find them. If you did, the money for advances could be astronomically big. Some of the American developers got big advances when they were backed. And some did very, very well. And again, 20 to 40%, somewhere in the middle of this, I think. The royalties were slightly less in general, but stabilised and for big money. These were great deals, but as I said, very hard to find, okay? Now look at the mobile era. How do we fund our own IPs? There's no publishers to give us advances anymore. This is where we've become stuck. The publishing companies during this console era lost the ability to sell original IP. They lost the skills, they lost the belief, and a lot of them sold out to bigger companies because of acquisition, and we've ended up with virtually no companies as publishers that will take us on as original developers, saying, I've got an idea, giving you money to make you stable and secure whilst you're making the game, and then give you royalties on the back end of it. So, instead, we self-fund or we sell company shares at the start. And this is my point. This sale of company shares at the start is kind of a corner everyone's been backed into by too many games in the market, zero price games, no publishers. But just because they're the conditions doesn't make selling company shares at the start a right thing to do. It's a wrong thing to do. You lose a lot of money and a lot of control by doing that. So try and self-fund or try and get work doing some other people's third-party IP for some money to keep yourself going and do your other work in the background. This is what you've got to try and do. Risk per original IP. These are just figures I plucked out the air, okay? So you can shoot them down. In the home computer era, only 10% of original IP games were huge risks. Normally we could get a deal quite easily. Sometimes the advances were too low, so we couldn't cover our costs. Sometimes the sales were low, so we didn't get enough money back. But in general, Making original IP and selling it was quite easy in this time and a great time for us because the publishers were hungry for it, the public were hungry for it, and the channels were hungry for it. In those cases, the channels were shops, but they wanted it as well. In the console era, the risk for original IPs was horrendous because we couldn't get deals. So 90% of original IPs you worked on, you couldn't find a publisher to fund it, back it, and get it out there. So time and time again, games were made, they were canned, they crashed in the middle. This was a terrible era, and this killed the belief in original IP. Now, I would say the risk is even higher for different reasons. We've got their channels to get it out there, but people run out of funds in the middle of making their games. They don't finish them. An unfinished game is worth nothing. It makes nothing back. War's a waste of time. You might as well have stayed in bed. You'd have probably lost less money. That is the harsh reality of development at the moment. Or the other problem we've got, very common, the sales are too low. So we can get our games out there on Android or on iPhone, but are we really getting enough sales to justify the time we've put in? This is the trap all of us are in at the moment, experienced and inexperienced people. The best aspects of each era. In the home computer era, we retained all our shares and we licensed our own IP. This gave us power and control, okay? The console era. Very good fixed fees on third-party IP. If you could get a third-party IP deal and you're happy to do that, there were some very good deals out there, and a lot of companies did very well in the console era by working on other people's stuff and doing really good jobs and forming good relationships with publishers and platform holders. What's good now? We've got open worldwide platforms, okay? If we look, this means we can potentially reach the whole world easily, digitally. In the home computer era, it was difficult to break the world market. Our games never sold anything in America. For all the strength and sensible software games across Europe, we sold virtually nothing in the States or in Asia at all. Now it's much easier to reach those markets. The bad things about the console era, difficult to sell original IP. In the mobile era, the bad thing, we know. Too many games and selling shares in your company to take your power away. We can't easily control this part, but if we're smart, we can control this part, okay? So, for independent developers to really thrive in the digital age, they need to learn the lessons of the past and use them in the future. Learn from what we did in the past and apply it to what you're doing now. And the way forward is what I'm calling the digital era, which is the next 10 years coming from now, to have time for true independence. So if you want to be an indie, be independent. Retain financial and creative independence. You can work on third-party IP in doing this as something to, if you've got 2 games in development, one third-party IP pays the bills, pays everyone wages, and the second game can be your own game, which you can keep going on the money you get from this. This is probably it's what a lot of people do, and it's a smart way to do stuff. Things to avoid. I've said this a lot of times. Now, selling over 20% of your shares. Please don't do it. If you can, sell 0 of your shares, okay? Losing control of IP. Understand, when you make a game, you own the IP. The moment you sign a deal which says you're licensing the IP to someone else, it's gone. So make sure the terms and conditions of that IP work. Learn to work with lawyers. Learn to work with accountants. Learn the business side. It's important. Don't be taken advantage of because you're new. Don't be enthusiastic and keen to join the game-making party. You know, this is going to be your career. I spent 30 years. I've got 3 kids. I own my house outright. This all comes from my time in games. For you to have a life, a real life and a real career, you need enough money to be stable and to have your personal life settled as well, okay? Don't go rushing in all full of enthusiasm, make stupid mistakes like we've heard about loads of music stars in the past, and then end up regretting it 5 years later when you lost a lot of money and everything's gone backwards. Don't play at being a publisher. We can all self-publish. In my company, we did Speedball in the last few years. We've self-published on iOS. We've self-published on Mac. We didn't do it on Android. We didn't do it on Steam. We went via Sony on PS Plus. And now, it's harder. The marketing skills we need are more. The competition is more ferocious. We can all play at being publishers, but there's 2 problems with it. Number 1, we haven't got normally the marketing and sales skills as developers. Secondly, we haven't got time to do it because we're too busy developing. Try and work with partners that can do this. Cut them in. You know, In the old days, when we were signing off 15 to 50% deals for us, that meant the other guys, the publishers, were taking 50 to 85%. Now 85 is a bit high, but if they even take, now in the modern era, between 25 and 50% of the money, if they're doing all your marketing, all your sales, so you don't have to worry about that stuff, you're just delivering, that can be more efficient, providing you don't give them control of all the IP. Providing you license them the rights. On this platform, you can do my iOS stuff. You can do my Android stuff. You don't give shares. You don't do deals on the shares of your company. You do deals on the shares of your games, which is the old royalty model. So people aren't buying your soul, they're buying into your IP, which means they're going to invest in that IP and try and build it up in the market. And if you're smart, you can cut that to different people, hold the rights and license it out and piggyback off of what they're doing for you, okay? If you sell your shares, you're selling your soul. You're selling everything, you're selling you, you know? And VCs have made big mistakes in investing in companies rather than games. The publishing model was to invest in the games. Why does a VC want to get involved in how you're running your office and how you're paying your staff and how much you're spending on the coffee machine? This to me is a mindless model. The investment should be, and VCs need educating as well as the developers, in games, in your IP. And these are the deals I think you can probably find if you're good, if your IP is good. Don't do too many games at once. I would recommend probably 2, a maximum of 3 in development at once. One of them should be, if you can get it, a deal for third-party IP to secure some money so you've got some solvency. And then the other 2 will probably be original ones, which will mainly be 1, and towards the end of 1 you might start seeding a second. Don't distract your focus too much. I would recommend probably 2 is the number you should be looking for, okay? So don't get carried away and get loads of half-finished games. Every half-finished game is going to get you no money. Just finish. Don't write unnecessary tech. A lot of programmers want to write their own engine. Well, guess what? You don't really need to anymore. You know, there's plenty of good third-party stuff out there. There's so many things you can do. In terms of tools and technology, there's never been a better time for development. Don't waste your time doing what someone else can do is the lesson here. Whether it be technology, whether it be marketing, it be licensing, publishing stuff. Other people who've got skills, work with them. You know? Concentrate on what you're good and do it well. Go out and do it well. Don't pay, as founders, don't look for an income from day one. This is the flaw of a lot of small development companies. They're like, but I need a wage. How am I going to live? Oh, we need some VCs to pay in our shares so we can pay ourselves. This is a mistake a lot of people make. You've got to be prepared for those first 6 months to probably make nothing. Okay? This is the key lesson. Try and live on nothing from your games. If it means you've got to do some small other job, waiting or whatever, then do that. But don't try and take income from your fledgling company because the cost is very high. You know, take income when the money comes in. Take the income when the royalties start rolling in if you do things right. Don't look for, I want 2,000 euros a month or 3,000 euros a month from day one. Because if there's 3 of you doing that, that's going to be 50,000 euros and you're going to need to borrow that money from someone. And borrowing that money can often kill your business because you're borrowing too early when you don't know what you're doing. If you're not prepared to live like that, you shouldn't be doing game development. You'll kill your company for this short-term gain you want in the first few months. Until you've got an IP in the bag, your company's nothing. It's worth nothing anyway. So try and get to that point of having an IP you can start to sell, license and interest people in without selling your company or giving away any shares. And then once you've got that, start to deal on the IP by cutting people into that and getting them to invest in your IP and not your company. But here's the thing. People want to invest in your idea about an IP. They'll invest in it when they can see it running and it looks good. So you've got to get to that point before you start chasing money. This is the real key here. That's how you get investment into IP, by having something great to show people. Don't accommodate weak links. Lots of startups have got a problem. They involve with their friends from uni or people they've split up from companies for and formed something. If someone's too weak, lots of people can't hack it being self-employed. They don't like it. They don't like the fact they haven't got income. They don't like the fact they're very responsible. They might be saying they're a great programmer, but they're not strong enough to carry it. Get rid of them. They are going to drag your company into the ground. You've got to be harsh and realistic. Not everyone can cut it. It's very, very hard to be self-employed and to make great games. So be brutal, because getting rid of weak people protects the good people that are left, okay? Weak people drag good organisations down. Things to do. Plan for realistic success. Plan at the start like you are going to be successful. If you're planning like you're going to fail, there's no point. That means the way you structure things. Find publishing partners, distribution partners, marketing partners, call them what you will. Find these guys. You know, I did a Speedball, for example, the marketing. I don't do marketing. I just gave a company that I knew and trusted 10% of the income on that platform for a period of time in that territory. It cost me no money. They were just percentaged in on sales. This way, I've got no risk, but they're cut into the success. Learn to incentivize people in this way. Yeah, for a period of time. So you can say for a 6 month, the things you control in these deals are which platforms, which territories, and for how long. So it could be on the iPhone in Europe for 6 months, and that's how they're earning their money. However these deals might work and be configured.
What are typical ranges of revenue shares for that? Like, is there like
Everything's different. So I mean, in how I've run my stuff, I work in quite a complex way, and it's understanding how you carve up deals and you carve up royalties at the key. So for example, if I look at Speedball, it's the best example I can give. So with Speedball, obviously Apple will take their share, or Sony will take their share, or whichever revenue, they'll take their stuff, whatever. So your deals you do about the income you're actually getting. So the first person to take a cut is the license holder. So in the case of Speedball, I cut the Bitmap brothers in because it's their IP. So they will take about 30% in general of that. If it's an original IP, you don't have those people to think about. Then next down would be people helping me with marketing. Oh no, above them would be publishing partners. So for Speedball on Steam, we're going via Mastertronic. So in that case, they would take a deal which is going to range between, at the moment, probably 20 to 50%. You can get deals, if you can get in the 25 to 30% region, it's good. If they're handling all your marketing, all you're getting to market, all that stuff, they'll take that away from you. After that, you then cut in the license holder. And then, in my case, I also work with development partners, so then I cut in the development partners. So I cut with them as well, okay? There's no set rule, but the point is, I'm not paying anyone any money. I'm just slicing money up. They're sharing the risk with me, and then we share the rewards afterwards, okay? And if you do this platform by platform by platform and build your network, and you know, every platform demands a different way to do stuff. So, with me, why did who choose to work with me? Well, I guess because I've got a reputation for making games, so that I'm trusted, but also because, you know, everyone needs partners to work with, you know? Everyone needs that. Everyone needs content. Marketing guys need new things to market. Developers need new things to develop. Publishers need new things to publish. Nothing's changed. But if you do the right deal, you can cut them in without paying them anything. You're only risking the money you're going to get, a percentage of the money going down. But you can focus on development, and they can focus on what they do well. And with a bit of luck, you'll double or treble your sales anyway, because it's such a hit and miss business, you know? There's no point in learning how to market games over 2 years, which is going to destroy your company, when you can work with someone else who knows how to do it, and they're only going to take 10%. Okay? It's a no-brainer. Okay. License out your IP for percentages. That's what we're talking about. License it out platform by platform by platform. Build international contacts. You know, in my current game, I've got distribution in Europe. Now I'm talking to people in China, people in South Korea, people doing a French version because it's a language game specific to France, in Southeast Asia. You can also talk in South America. There's so many different markets that you can, once you've got the IP, to exploit it on different formats in different territories, okay? And all these small slices of income build up. Control with contracts. You've got to learn, someone in your company's got to learn how to do contracts. The way these deals are done is all through contracts. So you get a contract with a marketing partner, development partner, publishing partner, which says, which says you're going to get X percentage of these formats of the game for this period of time in these territories. Your contract will do that. Your payment terms will be in there. Someone in your company's got to learn to do this. This is how you get IP power, through contracts, through the boring, invisible part no one wants to think about, the legal stuff. Someone has got to take this on board. Like I say, it took us 10 years to learn early on in Europe, but this is what you need to do. Reward all your staff with percentages. What kills most development companies now is people taking wages on a month-by-month basis. If the game overruns, they just want another month's wages. Okay? This is killing a lot of companies. The way we ran Sensible Software, everyone was on advances like we were. So if we had 100,000 advance for someone on a game, we would basically take half of that money, 50,000, and split it between lead programmer, okay, you're on 25,000, artist, you're on 15,000, sound guy, you're on 5,000, whatever. We'd split it up so that 50% of the money went to us, 50% went to the team, and everyone was paid not by month, but by job. So, for example, if the lead programmer was on 20,000 for Cannon Fodder, say, if the game overrun in time, he wouldn't get more money. He'd get 20,000. But he was also on 30% of the royalties for that platform. So, obviously, with a good game, he made a lot of money by sharing the risk with us. So we took our advance money, we carved it up so we were safe, and then when we were getting rewarded by royalties, we also rewarded all of our staff. And the way we did that was, on the original formats, 50% of the money would go to the staff in royalties, and their wages, if you like, were advances against those royalties. Do you understand how that works? So they're offset against the royalty stream. So you're actually not taking any risk. On the platforms which we licensed out, which we didn't develop with other partners, so for example, Sensible Software, we did a PC version, we never developed in-house. Then our developers would get 15%, the original guys, and we'd take 85%. So we made our money a lot on the licensing outside. But our guys were still incentivized, they still were making money from it. So if you can get everyone in your company to buy in and be part of the success and share some of the risk, and not just do simple deals for wages, but carve it up into amounts of money per game to finish it, you're safe. You know that that game is going to cost you 50,000 euros to make. And you know if you go over time budget, you're not going to go over money budget. They don't need to be linked. If you've got good contracts, again, it's about contractual control, this time with your employees, not with the guys on the other side. Third-party IP for cash flow. Do games for other people. Do the odd license game. You know, in my time I've done Mike Tyson Boxing, Casper the Friendly Ghost. These things just get you money. They keep things ticking over. They keep you alive. So don't throw them away. These are good things to do to learn technical skills and to get money coming in, and you learn how to work with these license holders, which is important. These are stats which are about why you don't sell shares. All these figures here, I was thinking about this when I walked here, all these figures are after tax. So this is after tax has come off. We got $8 million in 13 years running Sensible Software from our own IP. And these are after tax. So actually the income was something like something like 12 or 13 million dollars. 4 million of this was after tax profit. So this is me and my business partner, just half each. Okay? It's a lovely position to be in. I remember one time, we wouldn't pay ourselves wages, we'd occasionally take money. I remember one time we had a great time, Sensible Software so well. We said, well, we got 6 months' money in the bank, we got all our tax saved up, and we just wrote out checks for about 400,000 euros each, just like this. Because we could do that. We had no one controlling our shares, it was our company. We could do what the hell we want creatively and financially. No one was controlling us. This is a wonderful feeling to be empowered to do what you want. You won't get this if you sell your shares. It's why you must sell shares in your game, not in your company, because then you retain that financial control. Then after we took this 4 million out, basically in royalties, then we sold the company. Okay? So this is just the game whilst you're running it. Then we sold shares, but we sold all of them. Right? So all the time we're running it, we've got creative control, we've got financial control, we're taking money out, and then afterwards we can do the share sale at the end and sell all of them. So this model worked really well for us as a proper independent developer. I'm not saying you can emulate all of this model, but you can try and emulate some of it and maybe learn the lessons of how, in the long run, if you benefit and plan to be successful and you want to be independent and you're not planning for a 3-year exit strategy, which isn't really about being independent at all, but you want to run it for 5, 10, 15 years, this model is very good. Take the money out once and then sell it at the end and get money again. It's a good model. Do not sell shares cheaply as an indie developer, and license partners percentages of your IP. So as I say, cut people in so that everyone's in with you. Everyone's tied in with golden handcuffs. They all need the success. And a final thought. Indie means independent, which means freedom and do what you want. But to keep control, you must structure things so you can remain independent. Okay? That's the end of my talk. Thanks very much.